and welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me Banana Chan, if you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I am Banana Chan. My pronouns are she, they, and he. I'm the owner of a small box board game and RPG publishing company called Game and Curry. We have published several games in the past, such as Battle of the Boy Bands by Yansu Kim and Vicky Ho, and Lair by Tam. But I also do contract work on the side, so I also do work for other companies, such as Wizards of the Coast. I've done work for them. I've done work for Critical Role. And I've also done work for Renegade.
That's like, so first of all, I was doing some research for this podcast, and then I was like, wait, Banana Chan has a Wikipedia page. I don't need to do any work. I could just show up and pull up the Wikipedia page, and I'm just ready to interview you. So we could just go through this, and I'm just going to hit every single, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. But I am very curious about something that we don't have too many game designers who are also YouTubers. Sometimes I bring people on who are YouTubers kind of adjacent to the space or who do other things related to tabletop or cover tabletop. But very rarely do I meet a game designer who also does a YouTube channel. Let's talk about your YouTube channel. It's mostly, it looks like the link is going to be in the description for Banana Chan's YouTube channel. Highly recommend you check it out just for anyone who is not aware, especially if you're in industry professional or you're trying to be. Banana Chan drops some of the best educational content that you can find on the internet. So I highly recommend that. How did this get going? Like when you started your YouTube channel, it looked like it was you did some videos like back in the day, and then you came back in the last couple of years to sort of introduce a lot of educational content. What sparked that, and how'd you get here?
Yeah, so I could preface this by saying that I was previously a video producer for a company, for a management consulting firm, and in my past, I went to art school for video art, and so I sort of like had my start in video work for a long period of time, and I also did a lot of freelance work for other companies. So Bully Pulpit, I did their video for Starcrossed. Actually, I worked on a few videos for them. Starcrossed, Ghost Court. I worked with Ad Magic on a few of their videos. And so a lot of the stuff was just like freelance stuff. I was just like, yeah, I do video and I like games, like might as well, do a few videos if you need help. And so that's where it sort of started. And then I started writing my own stuff, and I was just like, I'm going to take a break on the video stuff because I'm already doing it for my day job. I just want to have that separation. And so I paused on making video content for like games for a while, until recently last year. I was just like, I learned a lot of stuff. And people ask me a lot of questions about how I got my start and how they can get into the industry. And so I was just like, might as well make a video, like a YouTube channel, just like with a bunch of videos that explains how you can get your start. Hopefully some of the stuff is, obviously all of it's like anecdotal. It's like a lot of stuff that I learned through my experiences working in the industry. So I'm just like, hey, if some of this resonates, then great. Here are some tips. Here's some stuff that I learned. Hopefully it can help you in trying to create something. And so that's sort of how it all happened.
Yeah, I really like your educational work on YouTube, especially because it's so earnest, and it's a lot of the time when you find stuff, especially YouTube content, any sort of video, it's like it sort of leans into being sensational, whereas this is all value. It's like really good content to consume, and it's honest, and that's just, I think it's very important for people within the industry if they're trying to become professionals. Like they're finding that those honest sort of sources and mentors and people that are good educators. That's another thing that I think you're gonna, we'll talk about in a moment. I wanted to segue real quick. Do you know Alex Roberts?
I do, yes.
What a cool person, right? Like
So cool. Yeah.
yeah.
And now they're like very close to where I'm at. Just because I recently moved to the West Coast, so I'm just like, we're in the same time zone now.
I believe she said it on my podcast. I want to say I don't know if she said it on my podcast or if she just said it to me. I'm not going to say where she lives. I can't remember. But
Yeah.
so and me being in the same area, yeah, it's kind of funny. But Yeah, there's just there's something about like the way, obviously it's because of her professional life, right? That she's able to
Mhm.
like talk to people and have these really super interesting and like engaged conversations with people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it has definitely taken the time to build up their skill, their skill level at conversations is just like way up here. So always a fun person to talk to, Alex. But about your YouTube channel, back to that. So you've been doing some vlogs basically of like some of the conventions that you've gone to. And that seems like something that's both kind of like a fun project and also something that not very many people do well, I would say, in just in general. But as far as you going to these different conventions and stuff, how many do you have lined up for this year, and how many have you done? And like, because this is like this list is getting pretty long on these vlogs.
So to be honest, for this year, I'm hoping to cut back a little bit just because of the move. For transparency, like I just basically moved from like the East Coast to the West Coast, and it took a lot out of me to be honest.
Yeah,
And so because of that, I'm scaling back a little bit on conventions, and also just like because how I feel like because for some strange reason, like previously with all the mask mandates and everything, like I felt like a lot safer at these conventions, even though they were like massive and all these things were happening. I somehow felt safer then than I do now, and so now I'm just like a little bit hesitant about going to a convention. But that's just me. Like, obviously, if professionals have to go to a convention, that's like, a lot of people, that is their bread and butter. Like, they have to go, right? Luckily for me, I have the privilege of, choosing not to go to a convention if I don't have to. But the one that I am going to, the big one, is Big Bad Con. So I would never miss
yeah,
Big Bad Con for anything, especially because they are so safe with like, masking and like their vaccines and everything, and also just like the community is so amazing, and they put everyone's safety and comfort like at the top of their list, right? It's always a priority. So that's the big one for me.
yeah. Every person that I talk to who talks about Big Bad Con, it's pretty much the same thing where it's like, this is the most amazing experience of my life.
Oh yeah, have you gone yet?
No, I have not. I was thinking about going this past year in 2022, and I just couldn't afford it essentially at the time. So I'm hoping this year maybe I'll be able to go. It's the number one con that I would like to go to. I have to go to another convention this year for work, but that is like I have to go there. I don't necessarily like the area or anything like that. It's not like a fun area to go to. So
Mhm.
but yeah, San Francisco, right? For
Yes.
Big Bad? Okay. Yeah, San Francisco. I actually have some friends on the Start Playing team, like Devin and Shireen, and it'd be great to see them and just, hang out. I went drinking with them at last Gen Con. And we went to like four different places after the Start Playing Games
That's awesome.
sort of like mixer that we did or whatever. And we ended up like closing down a couple of different bars. But like, yeah, that
Nice.
I love that. I love the Start Playing Games team. They're just very like fun and warm and just like I don't know. They are like the group of people that should have been around within like tabletop games, like in I think when virtual tabletops were first coming out. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
wow.
I don't know. The way that they manage like growth and community and dealing with like me as a professional GM and like everybody that they interact with is just I think A plus. So I can't say good enough things about them. Obviously, I like built my living on them. So like in my first year on the website, I made like $51,000 like as a freelancer. So
Oh wow.
which is like more than some full-time tabletop professionals make. And I was just running
Yeah.
games as a GM, and that was like from nothing to that. So in this year, I'm looking at like I think 80, 90. I'm not going to push as much because like 15 games a week was too much. So I found that limit,
Oh,
and I could do that for a short period of time. But now I'm like 7 to 12, and I can fluctuate between those amounts and like still do my design and writing.
oh, it's
Um,
amazing. That's so good.
I I whenever I make it, quote unquote, I'm gonna cut down on more of those games to like maybe 4 games a week or less. But I would recommend it as a part-time, especially for a lot of people in the tabletop industry, and that's how I try to platform it. It's good as a part-time, but it's very stressful as a full-time job, to be
Yeah.
quite honest. Because freelancing, as you know, as a freelancer, is very up and down. So
Yeah,
um
I made, I think, like last year, the most I made in my freelancing game design career was, I think it was like 23 or $25,000, and that was it.
Uh-huh.
It's like
Yeah,
not
it's not.
sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not. When I talk to people like who have been in the industry since the 2000s, like Brian Cortijo, who wrote for like Dragon magazine back in the day, you know what I mean? And, is still doing gigs with Wizards and Paizo. And like he has a full-time job like most of the other contributors.
Yeah.
And even when I talk to some of the other freelancers who are full-time, the only reason they're able to go full-time has been because they have like a supportive like other element at home. So if you're like just a person without like a supportive structure, it can be really difficult to be a full-time freelancer. So yeah, I wonder like what's the tipping point and like when do we get to that point when we eventually like we can support people more often as freelancers. But
Mhm.
I think there's like that I guess there's that separation between like this conversation comes up often in like these freelancer discords that it can be really difficult to do everything that you need to do to make a successful product. And
Mhm.
so you have marketing, right? And then you
Oh
have
God, yeah.
everything involved with game design and writing and then project management. And there's like these three different things that you need to be really good about. And then community management as well. What are your strengths and like what do you think you do really well as a freelancer and as a game designer to be successful where you're at? And like, how have you like doubled down on like what you're good at? And like, what do you do to sort of ensure yourself against the things that you don't like to do and you aren't good at?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things, right? So I think that in terms of freelancing, first of all, to define like, freelancing from like the IPs that I own and create. So for freelancing and contract work, I am very much aware that I'm making something for someone else. The 10 cents a word or 5 cents a word in some cases. And sometimes even 20 cents a word or 25 cents a word. Like I know that this is going to be something that's going to be made for another company. And like, whatever this thing is, like they're going to take it, they're going to edit it, and they're going to like, they own it essentially. And so I'm not going to get royalties from it. I know I'm just going to get like a lump sum and I'm just going to walk away with that. Right. And occasionally it's not a lot of money, but that's okay. Like I have that understanding when I sign the contract. For IPs that intellectual properties that I own, that's a different story because when it comes to that, I sort of have to think about like, am I going to be self-publishing this? Am I going to be, sending it off to a publisher to, basically like pitch to a publisher and say like, hey, like take my IP and like license it and do whatever with it. Or am I going to be working with like a publisher in co-publishing this thing? And so, with my publishing company right now, like I feel like I've learned a lot about my strengths and weaknesses, and I don't touch my weaknesses at all. I just outsource it. So like some of the things I don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do, or like the capacity to do, or even the understanding to do, I'll just like hire someone else to like take that on. For example, like illustration, graphic design, like I'm not going to do that myself because I am not a graphic designer. I don't have that eye. I'm going to ask someone else who is a professional to do that for me. And so stuff like that, like even though like I could definitely like take it on myself, I'm just choosing not to because I don't think it's it's like a strength of mine. So, when self-publishing, I feel like you have to take into consideration like all of these types of things because you're making your own business. It's like a small business, right? Like each individual project that you have, it falls under your umbrella of like a small business. And so, when self-publishing, thinking about like marketing and thinking about like, the art and thinking about the layout and editing and, doing all sorts of things, sensitivity consulting, sensitivity reading, all of these different things. I feel like, obviously, like if I'm creating my own work, I have to hire an editor because I can't just edit my own work. That would just be, I feel like that would be counterintuitive. And also like they would spot things where I would not have like, insight on. And, same thing with like sensitivity readers, right? Like the reason why we have sensitivity readers is so that they can read through the document and like, basically like point out the areas where there might be challenges and you should, consider editing it or consider like letting your editor know and like, working together with them and like making sure that that's, it's sort of like a collaborative piece in that sense. And so when you're doing like, I think anything that's very based around like having a small business or like, doing something that's all on you, you have to think about like wearing a lot of different hats. For me, I'm very good at project management. And so like project management is probably one of the strong points that I have alongside with like writing stuff. And so those two are like the key areas where I like focus on when I'm doing like my own publishing for my own IP. However, when I take it to like another publisher, I'm just like, here, you tackle all this. You can figure all of this stuff out. I'll, do my tasks. I will, manage all of the tasks that I promise I will do, hit my milestones, hit my deadlines, and give my input into, art or graphic design occasionally. But the rest of it, like, I am happy to just give it to you and you can sort of figure it out from there.
Yeah. That's something that I came to the conclusion of, and I personally really like doing now, is that I have hired a project manager for like my future projects and like me wrapping up post Kickstarter now. I have a project manager because I'm like, I just want to be creative for my own work now. I just want to be the creative department and like I can have someone else be a project manager. I hired someone who's also a writer, so we'll bring them in and we'll have them do some writing for some of these projects as well on the side, and they'll get that, and then they'll also be the project manager. So it's a good deal for them as well in that respect. But we're going to talk about project management now because I love project. So I am normally the project manager. So where did you get started on project management, and like what was some of the better resources that you used when you were learning about it, and how does your workflow? Let's start with the small questions first. Where did you start, and like how did you start building up your skills for project management?
Yeah, so I worked for a management consulting firm for some period of time, and I think that I learned some of the skills there. I was fortunate enough where they were basically like very happy with me, like taking on project management courses, taking Scrum Master courses, getting Scrum Master certified, and all of that stuff. And so it was a relatively agile place I worked at because it was sort of like an incubation lab. Like they were talking about like creating workshops. A lot of the work that we did was like creating workshops for like other businesses, trying to make sure that they understand like how what customer needs are, and like what are some products and services that we can offer out of these workshops, and like brainstorming and having that collaborative thinking with executives from different businesses. And so that's sort of where I learned a lot about this type of stuff, where I was just like, okay, like I understand like this flow and this process now. While I was working there, I also went to school at NYU for my master's, which was in it's got a long title. It's no longer available anymore. Like I think like the courses, they like stopped having them for some strange reason. So it's like you can't even look it up anymore. But I swear I do have this degree. It's for graphic communications management and technology, which is like a mouthful. And like, what does it mean?
Right.
It's mostly just a management type of like, or project management type of thing. So yeah, I think that's sort of where I got like a little bit of this the skill set from.
Yeah, you're a legacy character class. Wow. That's cool.
I feel like being educated in it, like, going to school for it is very different from like actually doing it, right? Like actually executing on like, creating plans and like making the strategy and, all of that stuff. Like, I feel like it's very different because when you like actually do it, there's stuff that you have to keep in mind because, you're working with people. You're not working like, in this like small environment of like a classroom where you're just like learning and absorbing all this stuff. You actually have to consider like, how are people going to react to my plans? How are people going to react to like the ways that we talk about like brainstorming or workshopping, all of those kinds of things. And so like, I think that, that was something that I had to sort of learn in the job space, and later
Yeah.
on try to implement that into my freelancing world, games world.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of weird like thinking about application as opposed to like education, and sometimes you'll end up learning a lot of very core foundational stuff that just doesn't, there's like the job as it's meant to be, and then there's the job as the reality, and like being in the real world and like actually doing it, and that has evolved in a much quicker rate
Yeah.
than the education system, for instance. Yeah, I'm curious about like so I know a few people who have done like Scrum, then that's what it's called, right? Scrum.
Yes.
My all of my project management stuff is like from the military, but obviously that was like regimented a certain way and then like very different in many respects for good and bad reasons. But I'm kind of curious, what is the, for you in like doing like Scrum certifications, do you remember how long that normally takes people to
Oh,
achieve those? Is that like a 6 month course or what?
it was like 2 days. 2 days.
2 days? Oh,
Yeah,
I
it
better
was
sign up.
fast. Yeah. I mean, it's
I
expensive. That's the one thing. Like,
Oh,
if you have
okay.
a company
Okay.
that'll back you up and be like, yes, I will give you money for it, like, do it.
Yeah.
But I think that it is an interesting course. It's very good to know. I feel like it's more applicable than like me going to get my master's for management for some strange reason. Actually, I think the reason why I think that is what you just said was basically like application versus like absorption of like whatever
Hmm.
you're learning in the classroom. And as an example, when I was doing my master's, one of the people that we had to learn about and like read up on was Peter Drucker, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name.
That
Uh,
sounds familiar. Let me Google it real quick.
he is so as some background for like who Peter Drucker is. He wrote this book. I believe it was called Effective. I forget what the actual title is, but it's basically about like effective management and being like an effective executive.
Uh-huh.
And it's very outdated. Like it's a very outdated book. Some of the stuff that he talks about in his book is actually pretty much applicable. Like, you can apply some of the principles, but at the same time, the book is very outdated. It does not, really reflect with how you should be thinking about your current workforce. And
Hmm.
also, Peter Drucker himself never worked in an office. Like, he wrote this book and he was just like, yes, this is how offices should be managed, but like, he never worked in one. And so it's like an interesting, like, sort of like, okay, like, take it with a grain of salt. Some of the stuff
Right.
is good. Some of the stuff is very, like, it does resonate, but like, you sort of have to think about like how you want to manage your time and how you communicate with others, that fits more with like the modern framework versus like what is being said in this book. So something to keep
Yeah.
in mind.
Yeah, yeah. Now that I've actually looked at him and I'm thinking about it, like I have learned about Peter Drucker in college. Yeah,
Yeah.
I so it's some basic like 101 management classes, and it was just like I was just basically just doing them because it was like my pathway to my degree, which I have since like fuck that. But
Yeah.
I've done about 3 years of school, so but yeah, I at college, I mean, so but yeah, so it's one of those things like it's where how are you spending your time, and is your time spent valuable for your skill
Mhm.
building? Something that's very difficult to sort of evaluate and assess accurately. Why I really like resources like Storytelling Collective on the internet, and you can sign up for a course. It'll take you a week or two. Sometimes they pace them out to be a little bit longer, and you learn so much about like applicable skills that you can use to make something. Like they have the objective clearly laid out. This is how you create this type of adventure and how you get it published, and it's like step by step by step by step. And I can't say good enough things about what Ashley Warren and her team have done over there at Storytelling Collective for that reason.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I that's actually like when I was first starting to get involved in the scene, I was like very interested in Storytelling Collective for that reason, because I'm like I would rather pay the 15 to 25 or whatever the course was. They kind of vary in price, but I would rather pay that $20 and like get good applicable information
Yes.
than just like sort through all of this bad advice.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot of I mean, especially right now, right? Like we have social media, we have like all these different platforms where we get our news from. It's like, there's so much noise and there's so much information. Not all of it is going to be applicable to like, it's not a one size fits all, right? And a lot of it you sort of have to like figure out for yourself or like learn for yourself. And any sort of like, resources where things are organized in a fashion where it's like digestible, first of all, like
Yeah.
it's gold, right?
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely a skill, and one of the things that I find that when I get good feedback, I'm looking for people who, like when I put out educational material anyway, I'm looking for people to tell me like this was easy to understand. This was actually applicable. And when I look at a lot of the stuff that kind of gets put out there, it's stuff that is sort of not geared towards accessibility. Because if you're not making your stuff accessible to like the beginner, then you're just not making it for the beginner. Like you're expecting them to like come back to your program or your educational tool or whatever when they have more experience, and then they don't need that stuff because they learn all those things the hard way
Right.
along the way. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, that's what, honestly, we're just coming back full circle. This is why I like your YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, let me check the Wikipedia entry real quick. Let's talk about Jiangxi.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely like when I look over Jiangxi and I'm like glancing over it and look at the table of contents and I see here, and let me get like kind of serious because it is a serious topic. And I see here playing a racist, non-playable character safely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, this is a different kind of book. Like this book here is providing a lot of not only educational tools, but safe tools for people to explore very difficult topics.
Yes.
What do you want to tell people about Jiangxi and like your process of developing it and what went into that?
So that section was actually not in the book in the beginning until we started talking to James Mendez Hodes. And when we were explaining him to, the concept in general, he was just like, yes, very much into it. Let's go through this. And when we were, just going through it, like what we were thinking about most of all was like, what if players were playing characters that were not like themselves? That was our biggest concern. Like if they were not Asian, how can they play Asian characters? And so we wanted to invite James on to like basically work with us in thinking like, okay, how do we think through this? Because neither Sen or I, we're not sensitivity consultants. We're not sensitivity readers. I do not consider myself like a cultural consultant or anything like that, because I don't think that I have the training for it. Because believe it or not, it requires like a whole other set of like, understanding of like how to talk to people about that kind of stuff. And so we worked together with Mendez on it, and he brought up, yes, this is a great point. You are correct that we should work together on, trying to provide tools for players who are going to be playing characters that are not like themselves. But at the same time, let's talk about the GM and how they might have to create NPCs in this world that is, from a time period that wasn't that long ago, who might be an antagonist, like, a racist antagonist. How are we going to approach that? And so Sen and I, we didn't even think about that, right? Until we brought on Mendez. And Mendez was just like, we should talk about this. We should figure out like, a plan for this, just to, make sure that our players and the GM like knows how to play in a safe space, and also just like make sure that they don't harm anyone in the process of like, playing this game. And so that's one of the reasons why we have that section, because Sen and I were just like, yes, this is absolutely correct. Like we have to make sure that like, the GM knows how to mitigate that and like make sure that their players don't get hurt in the process. Like, yes, we want to explore like, all these difficult topics, but we also want to make sure that they're having fun doing it. And so one of the big things that we realized was that, there's always been I feel like there's two things when it comes to like more like darker and more like sensitive topics like this. And you know, one of the ways that it gets pushed back from bringing it into like a game table is, you know, players don't want to play this because they want to have fun. Okay, but like, what if players want to explore like other ideas? What do we do then? And so that's one of the things that we get pushback from. And then the other is that like, you know, we don't care about our players, right? Like there's like sort of these two ways of thinking where it's just like, we don't want to have this because we want to have fun versus like, we don't want to have this because this is the time period and like, you know, we have to play it like this. And so having these guidelines really, I think, helps the player understand like, yes, you can talk about these dark topics, but like, let's make sure that we're all on the same page here, and we're not like, you know, hurting anyone. And so one of the things that Mendo suggested was making sure that the GM, when they're playing the NPC, like a racist, antagonistic NPC, that they don't say the things out loud. Like they do not say slurs. They do not use like, you know, terrible bad language that like will actually impact the player's you know, mental health. Instead, describe what you're going to do and you know, describe what the NPC is going to do and going to say. So for example, like the you know, say for example, it's like in a situation where it's one of the family members, they're encountering like a police officer, and you know, the GM might say something like the police officer says, you know, says a slur at you and you know, tries to like antagonize you, and that is like, that's already enough. That's enough information that we need to know, right? From there, like, let's give the player the agency to like, you know, react to that and, you know, do what they need to do in order to like have their scene versus like actually acting it out and like doing all these terrible things, because that will actually like hurt the player. And so making sure that like players understand that they can play in this space, they can, you know, the GM can play in this space, the GM can like, you know, explore these sensitive topics, but making sure that they have the framework to like hurt anyone. I think that I just keep going back to this where it's just like, let's make sure that we don't hurt anyone. Let's play in these, you know, we can play with these sensitive topics, but like, let's just like not, let's not hurt anyone in the process. So that was really important to us. And that's sort of how it came about.
Yeah, I can definitely see that not only in that section and all the other sections of the game. You provide a lot of information about the different groups within Chinatown and some of these other like locations and these other groups from all around the world who sort of have gathered historically within Chinatown, and like the relationships between these groups and like the dynamics between them. When you say that, like, one of the things that you've really focused on in your game design is like to play it safely and not hurt people. And this stuff comes up in games, at least for me as a pro GM. Like sometimes, so I run Vampire, and Vampire is like potentially like one of the, it's a fucking dangerous game for sensitive topics, because like that shit is like, there's the least amount of barriers between you and a vampire than any other game, because like you were a person who was born in the 70s or 80s if you're a neonate, right? Or the 90s. You know, you got your Gen Z vampires now. But yeah, so like and I had this come up once where I just had this elder vampire, this older vampire who had this southern accent, and they found out that she was from Georgia. One of the players was like, I bet she owned slaves. And I was just like, okay, we're going to stop here. I'm not running a racist plotline. Like, I do not have the capacity to do this, like, both long term, and I don't have the capacity to wrap this up in a very responsible way. Because I just don't have enough training to do this safely. And especially because we have, I mean, like, regardless, but especially because we had a black player at the table. And I was like, so what happens if you lose? So what happens if you leave the game early? Then you've just interacted with this racist villain for this many like months or whatever, and like there's no closure for you. There's no catharsis. You know what I mean? So like I think those are all things to like really consider, like when you're talking about like dealing with sensitive topics, like what is the end point? What is like, can you guarantee that you're going to get to the catharsis of like an interaction like that? That's going to be really traumatic for people, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. And I think that when it comes to things like that, like definitely giving the player agency over an NPC like that, like having the agency to say like, I can make the choices to change, you know, this interaction, or I can make the choices to like, you know, to change the way that the scene is going, like that's really important. Because I think that like at the end of the day, yes, we want to tell a story. Yes, we want to like, hit as a GM, like hit those plot points, but we want to make sure that like, the NPCs that we have that are antagonistic, like they might push a little bit, but have it so that, the player that you're playing with, they can have the agency to like to come back and to overcome like the challenge or like the thing that's going on, versus the other way around, because we don't there is a, and I hate to say this, but like we already have like a sort of like power imbalance when it comes to like GM and versus player. Like the GM already has a storyline. The GM is like sort of in charge of like what's going on and pushing the story forward. But like in order to make it like a good experience for everyone at the table, when it comes to someone who is going to not necessarily look out for the player's character's best interests, the best thing to do, I think, in my mind, is to give the player as much agency over the situation as possible, so that way they can, push back at the antagonistic NPC and overcome them.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that you can have between GM and player, like out of character, and like you can just have
Yes.
that privately, and like what is the outcome that you're desiring, and like how we get there, like we can figure out like the journey and have that process. That
Mhm.
doesn't ruin things. Like I think some people kind of get married to this idea of like the sanctity of the story. But that's such an ego thing, I think, because that's like the GM saying that everybody else's story at the table doesn't matter, only the one that I'm telling, which
Right.
I think is bullshit. But yeah, absolutely. And always get really excited when I see RPGs that have all this information, because especially for playing people other than yourself as well. Like playing the other is so, I guess it's considered, because we've sort of integrated our view of tabletop games with actual plays, when that's not the case, right? They're two separate things. There's a big difference between like going on and like having an alt-white cast and playing Zhang-Chi as an actual play, and then playing Zhang-Chi with your group of friends who happen to be white. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can play Zhang-Chi as like a group of white friends. That's perfectly fine, and you have the tools to be able to do that and to explore that, and that's going to be like better than some of the other Orientalist TTRPG examples that you might come across, right? So
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. I think it's difficult to like, I guess, divorce people from the idea that they just don't know enough, or they can't treat something like responsibly, because no one likes to hear that, right?
Yeah.
No one likes to hear that. Oh, you probably just need to learn more. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. I think we created this as a response to like a lot of the Orientalist games that we saw at the time. Like there were definitely like a lot of games that I had played that I considered not necessarily respectful for me as an Asian person. And so one of the reasons why we made this game was just to like, provide tools and guidance for people who, maybe are interested in the themes of like, a Chinese American restaurant or like a Chinese American like experience, and they just like are interested in like what is the history, like what is like what happened, right? And so like that's one of the reasons why we made the game. Like the first and foremost reason why we made the game was because we wanted to have like a game for Chinese Americans, Chinese Canadian players, just like keeping that in mind. But we also needed to consider like this game is going to get into the hands of people that are not, Asian, or maybe they're not, from an immigrant family. And so we put those tools into the game just so that we can say like, hey, like, this is our history. This is like, how we view the world. And this is how you can sort of understand it better. And this is where we're coming from, versus like another type of game that might be a little bit more, Orientalist, like why don't you check out this one instead? So
Yeah.
that's the approach that we took.
Yeah, I mean, if you like Chinese culture, then why not get a game made by Chinese people?
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
1 second. I'm a little cold, so I'm gonna
Oh
change
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
shirt.
Yeah, do your thing.
1 second. Enjoying that Pacific Northwest spring already.
It's
It's still winter until like June.
right. It's like it's very gloomy, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, I grew up here and then I moved away for a long time when I was in the military. So I'm used to it. I like it. I probably need to digest more vitamin D.
Oh, good
Uh,
call.
yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I'm used to it. I kind of like it. The only time that I really don't like it is when I don't mind like light rain, but heavy rain is kind of annoying because then I can't go out and do stuff. But like
Oh
light rain,
yeah.
I'm just used to. I'm just like whatever. It's like it's little drizzle. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as me, I had something in my brain that we were going to talk about before I came back. All right, I'll come back to it perhaps. I'll come back to
Take
it
your time.
perhaps. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the work that you did that has really impacted my professional life. And I just don't know how yet, so I'm curious, like, to ask you about this. So, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. So, I have run Curse of Strahd, and it's one of my primary campaigns. At least it was last year, and I had to make so many, like, obviously I had to make so many changes to it, like, which is why I run supplements like She's the Ancient, and like I've made a lot of changes to remove a lot of the racism, ableism, and misogyny. And I'm very curious about your experience with Ravenloft and like your perspective and like you coming onto the team in order to write some stuff for it. There's a sort of relationship that marginalized people have with horror that
Mhm.
is not always good. Like, because a lot of the time, the identities of marginalized people, whether it be people of color, whether it be indigenous people, whether it be people with disability or queers, all at some point have their identity used as like either a punchline or as a way to make you somehow monstrous. So what has been like your relationship in approaching both writing for Ravenloft and then your relationship prior to?
Yeah, so I think so it's funny because Schneider basically reached out to me after Jiangxi happened. Either pronunciation is fine. But after that happened, he reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, like, we have ICATH on the line, in the pipeline, and we want to have someone write about it, and based off of your work with Zhangshi, like, can you do something with that?" And so I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take a look." And so previously, like, my experience with Ravenloft was mostly through Strahd. Like, it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. I didn't really play any other realms or dark with any other Dark Lords, really, because I just didn't have the interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I read about Xian Shang, she's the Dark Lord for ICATH. Uh, she was, I felt like she was a very one-dimensional character, and her space was like very short, like compared to the other Dark Lords that were available. Like, ICATH was pretty short and not very interesting or exciting, and so. I think I wanted to play with the idea of, like, she has I believe it's like her, and then there were like four other characters. I forget if they were like sisters or daughters or whatever, but like I wanted to sort of change that and make it more gruesome. Because I think that, like, her character initially was supposed to be sort of like this dragon lady, and she's like super hot and whatever. It's like one of those stories. And so I was like, I kind of want her to be like, to first of all have like a gruesome story, because like the reason why Dark Lords become Dark Lords, I mean, they just go through a lot, right? Like, it's like basically a very bad traumatic experience, and they
Yeah.
continue on, like, doing bad decisions, and eventually they end up surrounded by mists. Like, that's basically what
Yeah.
happens, right? And so for her, I wanted to think about, like, what caused her to get taken away into this, into ICATH. Like, what happened? What was the process like? And so what's the process of becoming a Dark Lord? And so I wrote a little bit about, basically, like, she was from like a war torn world. She was, she had a lot of terrible things happen to her, and eventually she was like, she had a dragon mentor. That's how she learned magic, and she found happiness for a brief moment, but that was quickly taken away because she was so full of rage and vengeance, and she still wanted to, like, she still wanted more. And so she had children already at that point, but like uh her motivation was still to like avenge her family that was taken away from her when she was a child. And she just like, despite everyone around her, like it's despite all of like, the her family members and her friends and everything, she still was driven by trying to tear everything around her apart. And so that was sort of her motivation for like going and being taken away and like put into ICATH. And so there she experiences like her daughters, but her daughters are just like the monstrous versions of her real life daughters. And the city that she has, the city that she lives in, is now constantly being shaped by what she wants, but it's not really what she wants. And so she doesn't really know herself in that sense either. And so it's just like this labyrinth of like, the space constantly evolving. It's like this weird dream world. It's a lot of her, like, it's basically like her subconscious, but like it's turns like into a nightmare form and then in a real physical nightmare form. And so that's sort of the approach that I was taking with ICATH and her space. So it gives her a little bit more of that, like, she's a little bit more three-dimensional now versus like what it was before.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I love this in the first sentence of their little biography blurb. Her home was destroyed by a colonizing force. That little blurb there, I'm just like, wow. So it's like finally we have a Wizards product that reckons with the fact that colonizers exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and whenever I play the Countess, which people have mixed feelings about as far as like my community and stuff, because everyone wants to bang her pretty much, but like at the same time, like she portrayed like an evil person, that people like, that lawful evil colonizer. And I think that's a sort of a thing that if we're talking about like sensitivity reading, we're talking about cultural consultants and stuff like that. When Strahd was written, it feels very obvious that sort of like storyline, that sort of thread in the plot is totally missing, because like you hear about all this stuff that's mentioned that Strahd had done, and then you like, if you just even shift your perspective like a little bit, it's like, okay, so what was the perspective of anybody, literally anybody else within this realm? And there's like almost no information about that. It's literally just all about Strahd. So you could say that's perhaps intentional because the colonization wiped out all of those other cultures, but at the same time, like you could still have that element in the story and provide more about all these other cultures that were wiped out. By this colonizer. Like you could have like the indigenous people like still represented in some way or another, like the elves, for instance, or the people that lived around Yester Hill, or some of these other anything, but it's just not present at all. So yeah, it's one of my biggest gripes with it. And it's not necessarily like they wrote the wrong thing, it's like they didn't write anything. So it's just not in there. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's definitely sort of one of those things where it's just like if we take the perspective of any other character, it would make it a lot more fun and rich and like exciting to play in, right? And so I would say like as creators, that's something that we sort of have to take into consideration when like creating things. Just like not only like making these cool characters that like do things and whatever, but also just like considering like what are like the motivating aspects or the human aspects of like making the story more rich and full.
Yeah, I would be, and I wonder if this is out there, but I would be really interested in like a supplement or sort of a more fully faceted Barovia that included all those missing elements. But I don't think I'm the right person to write that. So if anybody wants to write that, let me know, and I will help you.
I did write an MCDM article, which is full of NPCs in an unnamed, not Barovia, not an area that is related to D&D.
Okay.
And it's like a dark comedy type of thing. It's I could send it to you later to like
please,
for you to take a look. But it's very much like a What We Do in the Shadows type of like energy. And the characters are just like like we have one character who's like a very, very big fan of like the Dark Lord,
Mhm.
or we don't call it the Dark Lord in this. We call it like whatever. But like they're basically just like a super fan, and they're
Uh-huh.
just like they have this like weird parasocial relationship
Oh
with
my
the
God.
character.
This sounds amazing.
And we have like the personal assistant for like the Dark Lord, and you have to like help them. Like they basically join your party, and you have to like make sure that they like because they have motivations too. Like they don't want to be a personal assistant forever. Eventually, they
Uh-huh.
want to like do other things, and so like
More
maybe you could
power.
like right exactly maybe you can convince them to do something else. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it was a fun project to work on for sure.
Yeah, super cool. Let's talk about briefly, let's shift to Dune. Are you allowed to talk about Dune?
I worked briefly on Dune.
Oh,
I'm not gonna lie. I wrote like 1,000 words or 2,000 words or
okay,
something like
okay.
that. Like it was very, very small. But
It
it's a
does
great
make you look
resume
cool.
builder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does make you look cool. And then you did some work for Pathfinder.
Yes.
How exciting is it that the Chinese community had that new book? It's slipping my. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Oh shoot. I'm like, yes.
I don't want to say the wrong thing. I can't remember what it's called.
I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, I
Pathfinder.
know. Yeah, I
I
know.
wrote on it and I
Oh,
can't
did you?
remember. Yeah. um it's just because it feels like so long ago. Anytime
Yeah.
you probably have this too, where it's just like, after you've written something, you just like forget it instantly.
Yeah. Honestly, it makes for a healthier lifestyle because then, like, when stuff doesn't come back or like you fire off emails, you're just like, if you fire and forget, then it's like,
Yeah,
it's less difficult just for your life to get by because then you're not worried about it, you know?
exactly. I think it's Tian Sha, but
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
is it Tian Sha? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to like because
Yeah.
I also have another product that's coming out that has the word Tian in it, so I was just like,
Okay,
I
okay.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, I was talking to I believe I was talking to Daniel Kwan about it when he was recording on the podcast pretty recently. So yeah, that's amazing that like if we look at something like that and we're like, hey, how did we get this many like Asian writers on one project? It's like they just all appeared out of no, they've been there the whole time. Like
Right.
they've been
Yeah.
around. So it's like it just makes me think about like the state of the hobby perhaps like even like 10 years ago and like representation and just its lack of it and how many products I see even recently sometimes on like Kickstarter and stuff that just have very just inappropriate very inappropriate like material that's not written by the appropriate team. Yeah, so I would love to hear more about Forgery. This is a new thing you got going. Why should people go and find it? This is on Indiegogo. Please tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Forgery is a solo horror role playing game where you are playing a disgruntled, jealous art forger who is down on her luck, and she's randomly been commissioned by someone with a lot of money to recreate a cursed demonic painting. And as you're painting this, as you're playing through the story, you actually have paint by numbers, and so you're recreating like this artifact. You're creating this cursed painting as you play. And yeah, so it's on Indiegogo right now. I think we have about I don't know, a few days left. But after like the campaign ends, you'll still be have access to like to getting the game and checking out the different pledge levels. It is a very dark game. It's not for children. It is very it's R-rated basically, I would say, and I think it's just like a game that I feel like is very personal to me because professional jealousy is something that like I have tackled with in the past. I don't think that I'm as jealous or as or I don't think that like I think that this game was like very cathartic for me in order to like to play with like these themes and play with these ideas and just sort of like think about like hey, why do we think about stuff this way, and just sort of like play around with this idea and this theme, right? And I'm also sort of like sick of getting hired on to, I mean, at this point, writing games about like Chinese culture and Chinese experiences and like, all of that stuff now. Now I'm just like, I want to do other things. I can write other things. I can do other things. It's not just, it's not just about the Asian experience, about like, I can do other things as well. So this is sort of my way of tackling that.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love the concept. It kind of reminds me, sort of gives me the vibe of like Dorian Gray, which is you seem to, based on your reaction, you seem to have read that. But yeah, so like the queer icon of like that era, I suppose. And I really like stories like that. We actually have a similar sort of vibe for one of our characters in the Vineyard RPG called the Siren, and we sort of recreated the Sarah Madsen wrote this one, and we recreated the Dorian Gray sort of story with a statue essentially of this person who made a deal with the Vineyard in order to retain their beauty after they survived a fire in their theater. They're a performer and stuff, and so part of that deal is like to reap souls and stuff, to reap people for the Vineyard. But yeah, so, and the character's a banshee essentially. But yeah, so I think that sort of horror experience, it's very personal. It's very interesting that it's a single person RPG. I see more of these popping up lately. Why do you like solo RPGs?
I think for me, there are a couple of things, right? So the first one is that this is a game where an artifact is created at the end. And I think that artifact creation, while it is fun when you're doing it with a group, while you're, playing with a group, I think it's more fun when you're doing it by yourself. And so creating an artifact by yourself, I enjoy much more than with like a table of folks. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing for me is that I like having these experiences which are cathartic in nature, which are very much about like, introspection and just like trying to understand like more about yourself through playing like a different character. And so I think those are the two reasons why I really enjoy them. I'm not sure why other people enjoy them so much, maybe the same reasons. But yeah, for me, that's sort of like why I really like them.
Do you have anything that you have like coming up on the horizon that you want to talk about? Anything that you want to highlight from your past period of work that you're really excited to share with people, or something that you're working on right now that you'd like to tell people about?
Yeah, so working on a lot of things all the time. And I guess like for Forgery specifically, I am working with like a whole bunch of different people on it. Just wanted to highlight like Indrani, who's making the dice for it. Also, wanted to highlight, all the people that I'm working on with this product. So the cover is made by Alex Ekman Lawn. Ruby Lavin did like the graphic design. Matthias Benici also did like the cover design. Karen 12's fantastic editor made sure that I made sense in the actual text. And we just hit our stretch goal. And so for Austin Taylor to join on the team so that way we can like create a small game together. Previously, Austin and I, we were working together on Deimos Academy with Amanda Call. And so it's another one of those games where it's like, you're creating artifacts, you're making like little paper dolls, and the paper dolls are going through are adults. They represent your adult self returning back to your old boarding school where you were there as children. And you're just basically facing your fears, and your fears manifest in like a physical world. And you're trying to overcome them by going into different rooms. And you're going through this like coloring book type of thing. And so that game is in production right now. We've handed it off to the printers. They are dealing with that. So I don't have to deal with anything anymore. So that's very exciting. I'm trying to think, what else am I working on? Oh, for Forgery, Carlos Cisco and I actually wrote a screenplay for it, and he's handling it.
Okay.
Carlos is handling it, or his agent's handling it.
Yeah.
Oh, I think sorry if the lawnmowers are back again.
It sounded like a motorcycle.
Does it sound like a motor? Yeah, it does kind of, right? Yeah. Trying to think what else is going on. Forgery is a part of a trilogy, so hopefully if there's a lot of interest in this, then I'll be working on the next two games. The second one's going to be about fashion, So you're going to be making your own sort of like fashion accessory versus like a paint by numbers. And then the third one is going to be about music. So I'm hoping that, it will be sort of like you're sampling music and you're sampling like sounds that are available to you and playing around with them that way. Along with that, I have a few other games that are coming out this year. I have a mass market game, a mass market party game that's coming out to Target and Walmart.
Oh, you're gonna be a
next
fucking
month.
Target? Oh my
Yes.
god! Oh my
It's
god!
really funny. I mean, D&D is in Target, so I'm just like, okay, like,
Yeah, yeah.
Ravenloft is there. Um, but it's really funny to me that like I have a mass market party game. It's called No Context, and basically
Uh-huh.
you're matching up like a picture. It's we're using the Mr. Levinstein IP, so we licensed the game out to Skybound, and it's designed by myself and Jason Slingerland, and basically what happens in the game is you're taking pictures and you're trying to guess what other people's pictures are with other pictures. So you you have you have a target photo, like a target picture, like a target image, and you have a hand, like a deck of cards which also have images on them, and you're trying to basically like say you're trying to put those pictures next to a yes or a no, and you're trying to make people guess which of the target pictures is yours with other pictures. It's very confusing, but it's very fun. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's hilarious because like once you start playing, you're just like, how did you get to this image? Like, why did you guess this image? That doesn't make any sense. And then you have to explain to the other players like, this is my reasoning behind why I chose this image, to say yes or no, to try to explain to you it's this target image that I'm trying to describe with these other images.
Yeah, I see that here. There's if I've nocontextgame.com, it looks like there's a free download where you can just check it out if you want to just take a look at
Oh,
it.
our
But yeah.
publisher didn't tell us this, but yes,
Yeah, so
I
as
should
long as
probably
I'm
cut
on the
that.
right game, I think I'll send it to you real quick, the link. Banana Chan, it was really great to have you on. This has been wonderful. I've had a really good time. Thank you for coming on.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, thanks for listening. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/isfriday, or you can find some of the work that I'm doing at vineyardrpg.com if you want to pre-order the book that we made.